Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. With host and founder, Richard Case, and co-host and retreat leader, Trish Harrington. Today is our special guest day, where we will hear from a friend in the ministry who will share their insight and stories on truth in this chaotic world. And now your host, Richard Case.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is Guest Thursday, and this is a special time. This is our second session with Jonathan Weinberg, who's a cousin of Denny. The topic that we brought in, which is a little bit different than we typically do for Guest Thursday, is how do we honor and respect people that have differences of opinion with us? And then how would you actually engage in that process that maintains that honor and respect, even though you might disagree? And last session, there was a discussion, Jonathan brought this up, of it's fundamentally based on love, which is affection for each other and a desire to honor and respect each other willingly. And you feel that way because you guys have that affection for each other. So it starts there. They have discussed that they work at the right questions to ask as opposed to statements. And we talked last time about the example of, Jonathan could say, everything Trump's doing is unconstitutional. And if that's the statement, Denny really has nowhere to go with that. But if Jonathan says, I believe that there's some things going on that might not be constitutional, and what if, and what about this? And then that forces Denny to have to look at it. And then how do you get underneath the sources, to get it? So maybe the two of you could describe a little bit the process. What process do you use? And then I want to add some other questions and Jonathan made about humor, et cetera. But why don't you describe, what process do you follow to just keep this going in a healthy way?
Denny, you want to take that?
Well, yeah. So I'll start. So things are flying at us all the time. All of us. We pick up little snippets of news that are just shocking all the time. So there's never a shortage of a topic, and there's really never a shortage of a story. So I think one of the things we did early on, because we didn't know any better, was we would see a story and we would sort of blast it to each other saying, what do you say about that? Right. And we would do that back and forth. And as time went on, we do less of that. And what we do is we ask the question about the subject. I'm assuming you've been following, all the news on blank. And everything I hear and my friends, in my circle, has this point of view. What do you think? Or even maybe the other way. This is so hard to fathom. How would you justify this point of view, right? So those are fair questions. We're okay asking it like that. And I think when I get a question like that from Jonathan, and I assume when he gets one of those from me, I'll first of all try and research it to make sure I understand the question, and especially because he'll ask it in a certain way, or he might point to an article, or a podcaster who says, or a book or a journalist. He does way more reading than I do. And so I'll try and say, all right, let me see if I can understand, what's in his question. And these days, going on any one of the AIs, you can, if it's an article or a book or some source, you can almost immediately get what it is he's probably reading. And so I think it's the idea that a point is brought up. The responsibility before we get together is to get researched up on not just the topic, but the way the question's being answered. So I understand what he's saying. And that's not that hard to figure out. Then, of course, I got to say, well, how do I feel about that? And that's some additional work. But some of that I don't try and answer immediately. I try and just let him know that I understand his question and that I've done some work, to be respectful, of what he's asking.
When you say I've done some work to be respectful, what does that mean?
Okay, so like I said, I'll get on usually one of the 2 or 3 or even 4 AIs, and sometimes I'll rotate that. But, if you use one of the AI engines, they tend to know you. So one of my AI engines is inside this whole process. They know Jonathan, they know the history of our topics, right? And sometimes I'll be asking a question and I'll get an answer back. If this is for one of your sessions with Jonathan, here's probably what he's thinking. And it'll list a bunch of sources.
It's funny. So you just keep looking. Are you looking for, are you trying to look for data, look for information?
Yeah, because he always wants the data to support it. And, with Jonathan, Jonathan's a physician and he's clearly did a lot of work in the area of research because everything about him is always the difference between causation and whatever the other thing is.
Yeah. I'm going to say, what's the evidence? What's the data? Before you get to your conclusion, let's go back and see what the data is. Do we agree on the facts? Are they collected validly? Are they legitimate? Are they biased? What are the biases? I'm looking for that all the time.
Are they uncorroborated?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so-
talk about the value of that. I think that's where the biggest issue of our culture is that we're repeating somebody else's statement and just saying that's what I believe and I hold it as true, as opposed to, and it sounds like, Jonathan, you're kind of a pusher of this, is okay, but what information, what facts, what data do you have to support what you're saying?
And all the time.
Yeah. Now, why is that so critical to keeping an open discussion? Because that's really kind of an important point.
Well, because, it's like if I have a conversation with someone who says the earth is flat, I'm interested in that to the degree of how does someone think that? Why would someone stick to that? And so I'm interested in how people think, but it's not going to convince me that the world is flat. So it tells me the limitations of where they're really looking for facts and evidence and data. But, I come up from a scientific background. I want to know, is the collection of data valid? And, is it biased? And what are the conclusions and inferences that you draw from it? It's one thing to say we agree on the facts. It's another to say we have really different interpretations of how to put them together and how to sort them. And like Denny said, is that just because something follows something doesn't mean it's caused by it. And that's a fallacy. So we look for fallacies in our thinking, in other people's thinking. You mentioned humor, and that in any conversation, especially serious conversations, I can sometimes seem disrespectful because I joke a lot. But if you can't find humor, then it gets too serious. And I find that if you can make jokes about things and laugh together, that you can talk about more serious things in the context of being able to laugh together. And that's really important.
Yeah. What does humor, laughter, a little bit of lightness, what does that open up in terms of our ability to keep talking to each other?
I think it's a visceral, not conscious kind of thing. It's not rational, but that if you can share humor together, then something comes together that allows you to talk about serious things or have fights, knowing that, or fight or disagreement or conflict, that it's repairable, that it's not permanent, and that you can come back to relating because you have that lighter humor level between you as well.
Yeah, yeah. And do you both, as you're approaching, getting information, discussing information, what are some key elements of your process? So you've accepted the question, you're willing to look at information underneath your news sources. How do you keep processing that so that you keep it in a healthy way, even though you still may not, quote, agree? And we'll talk about the impact of that. But how do you guys follow a process that keeps it healthy?
Let me say something first, is that I have a strong feeling, and I felt this way professionally, and I feel this way in everything. I think people always have mixed feelings, and not just like two feelings, but mixed feelings. Mm-hmm. And that when someone says, like, I think this, among their many mixed feelings, then it's easy to take the opposite side. Well, I think this. And the more you take one pole or one aspect of your mixed feelings, the more you identify with it and develop that that's a conviction and it's the truth and it's the only truth. And what I try to do with myself, but in our conversations, is to reintroduce all the mixed feelings and to discuss those and put those out in the table rather than being polarized and saying, well, you think this, well, I think this. It's like we both think this, and this, and you feel this more strongly, I feel this more strongly, but the ambiguity and the mixed feelings keeps the conversation more healthy and ongoing.
Yeah. And so that what that says, by the way, is that we're in touch with that and willing to offer that. You were talking about Trump terminating prosecutors. I haven't given a lot of thought about that, but I did read an article, this is a week ago, that there was a state that the Justice Department, set up a prosecutor, and 10 minutes later, Trump fired.
Yeah.
And my mixed feeling, which is what you're sharing, is that it was like, huh? What? Wait a minute. What caused that? How did that work? And I did process a little bit of a mixed feeling, as opposed to just accepting that everything that Trump done is correct, so it must have been a good thing. It is like, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense to me. And I'd like to know more about that. And that's kind of what you're illustrating, is that
Yeah.
Are you willing to follow your own true thought of being mixed about, well, maybe it's not all that I think, and that raises up the possibility then of open discussion.
And there are known biases that are in all of us. That if you like somebody, you're going to be more likely to think that what he does is good. Or and there's literature. Kahneman and Tversky wrote "Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow," which is it's a dense book, but there's people who've written about it. That if you ask questions certain ways, you can elicit kinds of answers because of biases.
Yeah.
And I joke with Denny. The problem is I don't have biases, and he does. But that's a joke. That's a joke. It's to try to see what biases come into play that you can't evade, but when you know them. So if there's a lot of data and you like somebody, you sort of discount the things that don't agree with you and you focus on the things that do. And we try to talk about how we both do that.
Yeah.
I'd add to this a couple things. One, there are things about the way Jonathan thinks that are informed by things he's studied that I've never been exposed to. And mostly because he lives in a scientific world and I don't, but I appreciate it. And so like he's asked me to read a couple of books. One that was on this, what was it? Irrational rationality or something, but it's on this topic of how data can be pulled together. And if you're not careful, you can misunderstand the conclusion, and how it's done all the time, and how marketing is intended to make us draw conclusions that are a stretch, and a lot of stuff like that. I read it and it gave me an appreciation for, okay, there, at least in certain contexts and certain topics, this question of is there sufficient data is something worth me being more careful about, because I'm full of mixed feelings, and I really quickly fall to the side of bias around, having 55% of a certain way and assuming all the rest. I do that all the time. The other thing I was going to say, so this idea of being more careful with the data and letting the data inform me more. On the other side of that argument is the fact that because I don't live in a scientific world, I live in a business world. And Rich, you know this, business decisions by executives are made all the time based on enough evidence to make the case. And the ability to say, I can sell this idea down the line and I can put it into the market. And when it's all done, good chance I'll be successful because I will be so doggedly focused on it that just by the force of leadership, I can make this happen. That's my entire history of being successful. And it's done me, it's worked most of the time, but it's also been a bit of a curse because sometimes you're just plain wrong, right? And so being a business person and this idea that sufficient facts is all you need and the rest is conviction, that doesn't work in science at all. And so Jonathan and I will bump into those differences. And I point out to him all the time that this president isn't just a president. He's a business executive that has had a lifetime of making decisions that way. And now he's in a very unfamiliar political role, and enough voters put him there the second time, already knowing who he was, how he made a decision, all that stuff. So we'll have interesting conversations about decision making, because most decisions that drive us crazy as Americans are neither scientific nor business. They're somewhere in the middle of these very two different models. We talk about this kind of stuff all the time. Any feedback on that issue about, scientific method, business decision method?
Well, what I was thinking is that what I hope the audience gets out of it, because we have fun talking with each other, is that people hearing this can adapt any part of it to be able to find people that are different and to have dialogue that doesn't come to a dead end because of disagreement.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing is, it's interesting is you and I don't have a timeline for when a topic is done, right? And so there's not pressure on either of us to say, I've either failed to make my point or my case, or to even be able to say, I still believe what I thought I, believed about a certain topic. It's never closed until we finally just are, it's something else has moved in front of it.
Yeah. And I have to say that, I haven't substantially, fundamentally changed how I think about things, but I've had some changes, and I've had to have a more open mind to take what you say and to say, there's truth to that, and I see that, and I can adapt that in some way into my thinking. I'm not unchanged because of these conversations. A lot of times when I tell people that I'm talking with somebody, who's my cousin who's an evangelistic Christian, Trump-supporting Republican, they wince. And I think that's not the right response. The response is, how do you do that? I want to learn how to do that too. I want to have that opportunity. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I when I tell people about our conversation, it's not that they wince, but they wonder why I want to waste my time on a conversation on a conversation like that, right? Because and I wonder if that's is that sort of just natural human reactions? We sort of find our way around a circle of people who agree with us most of the time, and we're just much more comfortable there.
Absolutely. But the point is it's you and I are two people, and there's other organizations that are trying to get people into dialogue. But the country's become so polarized. It's a cliche, but it breaks us apart, and it makes me understand how the Civil War could have happened when people have anger and fear and then hatred and dismiss and feel like their very existence depends on the other side being stifled. It's dangerous. So if anybody can draw something different from this dialogue that's I hope it's a butterfly effect, that people can talk rather than dismiss or fight.
Jonathan, we invited another family member into this to see how that would be. Why don't you describe first of all, why did we just decide to give that a shot and how that has worked out?
Well, that happened because we were at a family affair where Denny and I just keep talking and most people walk away, but Adam sat down and said, "This is really interesting. Can I be part of it?" And I thought, no, it's going to intrude. It's going to ruin it. It's like, we don't want anybody else. So he came in and it's only made it better. I think if there were, more than 5 or 7, it would just assume it's too many people. But introducing other perspectives has only improved the conversation.
Well, and because he's 15 years younger than us, 20 years younger than us, so he's a completely different generation. So he is connected enough to dynamics in the world that we don't ever see, which is what is it like to be a 50-year-old in the middle of all this, this commotion. And I think that has helped me appreciate, a lot more too.
And he's an independent thinker and comes from a background of being an engineer and interested in data and precision, but he's also a businessman and deals with groups and deals with people that he disagrees with or that disagree with him. And he lives in a very liberal neighborhood, and so he doesn't share all of the opinions. And so he's like, how do you have moderate opinions and understand or take into account all of these very, very liberal progressive people that are dominant around me? And how do you live with all this politics or ignore it and continue to live your life?
Yeah. You and I have also talked about, I've raised this, and you've been somewhat skeptical about this. This idea, could this process that we use actually be reduced to a method of some kind that could be made available to others to try this?
Yeah.
What do you think? So we've got an audience here that's listening. They're saying, "Gee, I wonder if I could try what they're doing." What does the how-to manual look like?
Part of it is, how can you have enough confidence in yourself that feeling open isn't betraying your principles, or trying to understand the other side isn't opening yourself up to brainwashing or to, like I say, stupidity, ignorance, or craziness, but to take the person seriously and to ask questions like they're really questions and not statements. As I've gotten older, I have to say, I've become more of a curmudgeon and cynic and nihilist, and I have to rejuvenate myself in the openness of the goodness of humanity and the possibility of real understanding. And, it's like it all comes back to love. Bottom line is, it comes back to love, whatever your background is, that if love means openness and tolerance and respect and honoring the other person where they're coming from and accepting that they're also flawed but decent human beings with an attitude of love, how can you do that? And it's like, it takes a ministry more than a psychiatrist to do that.
So Jonathan, if somebody said to you, "Okay, I want to try what you're doing," can you put together step 1 through step 10 for how I would do it? So, you've got a process side to you. How would you say, here's how you do it? Or could you put that together? If you were given that task, put this together in a little booklet that's 5 pages long, and it's got step 1 through step 10.
It's really hard. I tried to do that with a group of Jewish peers, some of whom were very, very, very pro-Israel, and some of whom were pro-Israel but very, very pro-Palestine, and some of whom were anti-Israel because of their understanding of the politics. And, in some ways, it takes people to be able to limit what they're talking about. And it's like changing personalities. It's very hard to change personality. If people are dogmatic, the first was, well, stop being dogmatic. Well, that really doesn't work. So it takes a moderator, and it's the rules are you have to listen with openness, with curiosity, ixnay the criticism, ixnay the point scoring. And again, I come back to if we agree on what the goals are, like we all want peace. It's like, who's going to disagree with that? Well, so how do you achieve it? What are your assumptions about human nature or about the nature of the people or who the people are that don't want peace? And once you agree on the goals, it's like, then can you talk about what are the means to get there? And that, I think, is a requirement. It's necessary and sufficient. And how to keep people on that. What are the goals? How do you get there? What are the downsides? And what are the other thing is how. If I can say to Denny, these are the things where I think you're right and I agree with you, and he can say to me, this is where I think you're right and I agree with you, we're having a more positive conversation than this is where you're wrong and this is where you're wrong and this is where I think you don't know what you're talking about. Is where are each other right and where do we agree? And we talk a lot about that. Yeah. And that helps.
But I'm gonna keep this idea that we can, and I know Rich is like resonating with this idea. Can we reduce this to a little step-wide book for how somebody could attempt to do this? I'm still gonna take that on, Jonathan. We'll see if we can do something like that together. But meanwhile, for the rest of the audience, I'll close this up. I know this was an unusual guest Thursday, and Jonathan and I were really having a lot of fun being a guest because we can never go anywhere and not have an abundance of things to talk about. But I'll say goodbye for now, and Rich will catch up with you the following week.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. Send us your questions and comments, and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.